Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our mid-year's update call, delivered by the three co-founders of the Pachamama Alliance. I'm one of the co-founders. I'm Bill Twist.
And I'm another co-founder. I'm Lynn Twist. And welcome to everybody. Thank you for being with us.
And I'm another co-founder, John Perkins. It's great to be here with all of you.
Yay.
So what we'll be doing, we'll be with you till 6:30. We're each going to update you. 6:30 Pacific time. We're going to update you on some of the things that are going on in the Pachamama Alliance and give you a little context for how that fits in with some of the things that are going on in the world right now. We plan on leaving at least a significant amount of time at the end for questions and answers. You'll have a chance to submit questions at that time, but I think you can also, if you're online with your computer, you can submit chat questions as we go as well. So we're going to start with Lynn Twist updating us on some of the things that are going on with our programs around the world and here in the United States.
Well, I want to start by just saying what is so clear for me is that the Pachamama Alliance is you. The Pachamama Alliance is the global community of committed people who whether you're listening to this as an audio feed or you're seeing this on your computer screen, you're what the Pachamama Alliance is. The Pachamama Alliance is our people. And we're building, as you know, because you're a part of this, a critical mass of conscious commitment around the world for a thriving, just, and sustainable way of life. And to do that, as many of you know, we have transformational educational programs that have been created to serve the commitment of changing the dream of the modern world and changing the game of the modern world. And those programs, those two programs which have come from the request of the indigenous peoples of the Amazon, are thriving and led by volunteer facilitators like yourselves. And I'm going to start by talking about the newest program, which is all of this is building this community around the world of Pacha people, an ecosystem of people who know it's up to us, an ecosystem of pro-activist leaders who are for the new vision and not standing against things, but not naive about what's in the way that needs to be dismantled so that the thriving, just, and sustainable world can express itself. So the Game Changer Intensive, which is the best, most incredible invention of Pachamama Alliance ever in my view, is thriving. And last year, some of you were in it, I hope. Some of you who are listening or watching us were in the Game Changer Intensive. But last year, we were really piloting it. We were experimenting. We were creating it. We were developing it. And we had 850 people who signed on and participated in some way last year. And already this year, now that we're beginning to realize we really have something that's valuable, that's powerful, that knocks people's socks off, that really educates them brilliantly, more and more people are telling their friends, and we're out into the general public in a way that Pachamama Alliance has dreamed of for some time. So we have 1,400 people signed up already this year. We're hoping to have 500 more. And the next course, if you haven't taken the Game Changer Intensive, which is a 7-week online experience that will blow your mind, touch your heart, and open up your world, it begins on September 15th, and the last day to sign up is September 6th. You can do it on our website. So we have people also gathering together to take the course in little groups. People in Pittsburgh, in different cities in Australia, in southern England, in parts of Latin America are taking the course together because you actually have the opportunity to be in groups or pods after each module and discuss what you've learned in Module 2, Module 3, Module 4. So it's really, really working. And the online power that the world has tapped into now is part of the Pachamama Alliance's way of being and seeing how we can impact, affect, transform, and serve the global awakening that's turning the tide. So we also have taken the Awakening the Dreamer Symposium, which many of you have participated live and in person, and as you know, was put into an online course in partnership with the Gaiam television people. But now we're taking it a whole nother step, and we're really working to create an online offering of a course not the symposium itself, because the symposium is really an in-person experience, but an online course or online seminar, you could call it, of Awakening the Dreamer that people can take easily online, and really it's interactive and people can participate in it, and that will be ready in August. It's going to be a fantastic tool for developing communities and developing the power of people working together. We also have a whole nother initiative happening with business people. We have wonderful business executives. Some of you may be on this phone call or this video recording, sorry, not tape, that's old school, who are really beginning to see that the Awakening the Dreamer Symposium program, the Game Changer Intensive program, is a perfect fit for employee education and enhancement in the companies of our time. And some really big, significant companies are asking for the programs inside of their companies as an educational program for human resources. The communities really is where the action is now. And if you're not in a Pacha community, create one or join one. Our communities are strong, they're growing, they're really a place where all of us can belong and be with like-minded people who are really working on making the world a better place, and really having this thriving, just, and sustainable world express itself. And I just want to give a little bit of a commercial about Brazil, since I just came back from Brazil. And the people in Brazil, first of all, everyone should go to Brazil. If you live in Brazil, you're lucky. Everybody there that we met has opened their hearts and souls to the Pachamama Alliance right away. And we met with people from ELOS, which is a wonderful co-partner organization for Pachamama Alliance there, Ecosocial, Red Indigo, or Red, Ubuntu, sorry, and Adigo, many organizations that see both the messages of the Pachamama Alliance and the educational programs of the Pachamama Alliance as part of the work that they're doing to bring forth transformation in their culture. And it made me realize how powerfully the Pachamama Alliance speaks to people of all faiths, of all ethnic cultures, of all countries, of all languages. We're really talking to the soul of humanity and the soul of our species. So here we are, mid-2015. The work is really flourishing, and I'm grateful to all of you who are making that work happen, and really delighted as a co-founder, as a co-foundee, to report to you it's working. Thank you for your support, your participation, and your love. So that's what I have to say.
Wow. Very good. That's a good update. So I'm going to talk now a little bit about some of the things that are going on in Ecuador. And there's obviously that's, as Lynn mentioned, that's kind of the source of where we've got our instructions to reach out into the world and change the dream of the modern world. We are still working, obviously, diligently in Ecuador to preserve what's one of the most important biodiverse regions on Earth, the sacred headwaters of the Amazon basin in Ecuador and Peru, focused in the Achuar territory where our work began. And so there's some really interesting things that have been developing there in this year so far. The Achuar held an election and elected their new leaders. We obviously work really closely with their leaders continuously, and so this is a big change that they've elected new leaders every 3 years. They elect new leaders. They elected their new leaders this year. I was down there last month meeting with the new leaders and looking at the projects that we were going to be engaged in and focusing on for the coming months, the rest of this year and into the future. This was particularly interesting this time because the political system in Ecuador, the political system of the outside world, President Rafael Correa's party had made a lot of inroads all around the country in indigenous communities. And traditionally, indigenous communities have been unified in their support for Pachakutik, which is the indigenous political party. And this year there was actually, in the election in Achuar territory and in the elections in Ecuador in general, there's been some split, and some of the indigenous people are supporting the president's party rather than the traditional indigenous party. The president's party has done phenomenal work addressing poverty and inequality around the country, and the indigenous communities in the highlands and in the coasts have been the beneficiaries of that. The indigenous communities out in the rainforest have really not. There's been very little outreach from the government into the interior of the Amazon yet, but some of the indigenous people in the Amazon are supporting the president's party. So the interesting thing was the election for the Achuar, there were people who were running and had been advocates for the president's party, and there were people who were in the traditional indigenous party. The president was somebody who was elected, and he's a supporter of the president of Ecuador's party, President Correa's party. President Correa's party has obviously been an advocate of oil development in the Amazon. The other leaders that were elected by the Achuar are traditional members of the Pachacútec and the traditional indigenous party. So the real question was, what does this mean now? Is the new president of the Achuar, who have been staunchly opposed to oil development, is he now somehow in alignment with President Rafael Correa's agenda? One of the first things that I discovered and that the Achuar reported was that, yes, they had elected a new president. His name is Ruben Samarent, and he's been an advocate of Rafael Correa's party. He's absolutely certain and committed that inside Achuar territory, the Achuar are unified. They're one. They're not aligned with Pachacútec. They're not aligned with Alianza País, the outside political parties. That's outside Achuar territory. Inside Achuar territory, they're Achuar. They're absolutely committed to protect their territory, to oppose any kind of extractive industry, oil development in particular. And so it was really interesting hearing that. It was also interesting the way that the reason they described why they elected a president who's seen as friendly with Alianza País. They think that will actually be a skillful way for them to interact with President Correa, maybe working with him on things they want, which is like funding for education, funding for health care, and standing opposed to him on oil development. So it's going to be interesting to watch that develop. Lynn and I and John actually are all going down to Ecuador in another 2 weeks, and we'll be there for 2 weeks, and we'll see what's been developing. I know already that there's the government has announced plans for trying to get oil development into an area of the central Amazon that does overlap with Achuar territory. When I was there, this came up. The indigenous people discovered that the government was trying to get in and do some environmental impact studies that would pave the way for seismic testing. So this was into Achuar territory, and so it was a test immediately of really how strong was the commitment of the Achuar? Was the new president, was he really gonna stand firm or not? And I'll tell you, the Achuar are absolutely, they're organizing workshops. We're working really closely with them to organize all these workshops to pull people together to make sure that all of the communities are aware of the cost of oil development, that the benefits aren't there in the long run, and the president, Ruben Samarent, is leading that charge. So I'm confident that they've made a really skillful move by electing a president who is on the outside trying to work with Alianza País, and on the inside is really committed to traditional Achuar values. The price of oil went way down, it started back up, and it's gone back down again. And that's going to make a huge difference eventually it's going to make a huge difference in Ecuador, in the Achuar's ability and the indigenous people's ability, and groups like us that are working with them to actually end up protecting that territory permanently. The Ecuador's oil development is happening primarily through their public state-owned oil company. And state-owned oil companies don't respond as quickly to market forces as private oil companies do. So there's still a momentum. Even though price of oil $50 a barrel up here, in Ecuador, their heavy crude is worth even less, maybe $45 a barrel. The cost to get oil out is probably $75 to $80 a barrel. It makes no economic sense right now, but there's still a momentum from the private oil company that's driven more by politics than hard numbers. And eventually, we think that momentum will dissipate, and we're going to be successful in supporting the indigenous people and keeping oil extraction out of there. There's one other thing that's another factor that's developed in Ecuador that's kind of the wild card, I see almost, and it's the Jungle Mamas program that we've been doing. So the Jungle Mamas program started out with, started out with a woman who was a midwife, went on one of our journeys, met with the Achuar. The Achuar were intrigued that she was a midwife, and out of that developed this whole program now. That was 5, 6, 7 years ago. Now this program of maternal health care and newborn care for indigenous women in the Amazon. And it's had a huge impact, and we just expanded it. We just completed the third workshop this year that now has it covering nearly 100% of Achuar territory. There's one or two communities that are so remote, we couldn't even get messages to them about the workshops, but we're in 98% of Achuar territory covered by the Jungle Mamas program. The wild card is that the Jungle Mamas program is also a program that's based in empowerment of women, and it has done a phenomenal job by focusing on organizing, bringing outsiders in to work with the women on obviously something that's so intensely, personally a woman's duty, giving birth, raising, caring for newborns. But what that's done is it allowed the women to get organized in a way that they're now seeing that they have a voice, and a powerful, important voice for Achuar territory and Achuar society. And the women being deeply connected to the medicinal plants in the forest, being deeply connected to the chakras, the forest is a nurturing supply of food, and they're responsible for that in their communities. The women are deeply committed to protecting the rainforest. And in cases where sometimes the men can be intrigued by offers of outside jobs or money, or they can be subverted, the women around the world, the women cannot be subverted by that. The women are just a force for protecting the rainforest. And that's another new thing that's showing up in Achuar territory and in this whole region. And so there's some great trends developing. Obviously, the price of oil is a significant one and is going to eventually take its toll on the government's plans to keep expanding oil development. The role of women is expanding dramatically, and it's powerful. And the Achuar are more committed and better organized than ever, and we're working as closely with them as ever. And we'll keep you posted in our next update and on the great successes that we're going to have. So I want to now invite John to tell us what you see happening in the world and what you've seen that
Thanks, Bill.
why we're all going to win this thing.
Thanks, Bill. You know, I think that getting back to the Achuar and the women's role is, I have the incredibly good fortune of traveling around the world and speaking at many different places. And so I hear, I think, a very positive thing going on around the world that we're not all blessed to hear, and that is that everywhere, whether it's in Asia, the Middle East, Latin America, North America, Europe, we're just seeing a huge awakening. And to me, it's just coming right out of that rainforest, you know. And it is the feminine too, the women, the side where we're all waking up to the fact that our feminine sides have to take care of the nest. And now we're understanding that the nest is the whole earth. And I think what we're hearing from the Pope, you know, it's significant that the Pope started his whole Latin America trip in Ecuador. And, you know, wherever he goes, he's talking now about the need to rein in wild capitalism, to protect the forest, to take care of the climate crisis, the climate change problem. And we're also hearing it from the Dalai Lama, who just had a whole series of events on that in Southern California. We're hearing it from everybody. And, I'm absolutely convinced that this is a message that comes out of Pachamama Alliance. It's coming from a lot of sources, but we're one of the big sources. And as I was listening to the Pope the other day speak, I was thinking, I don't know, he must have been to one of the symposiums, or at least the DNA of the symposium has gotten into him somehow, because he was speaking right from the heart of Pachamama. I think this is such an amazingly exciting time. There's a true revolution. I think it's the biggest revolution in the history of human beings. We're going through a revolution that's bigger than the agricultural revolution or the industrial revolution. This is truly a revolution in consciousness where people across the planet are waking up. At the same time, the forces that represent the status quo are setting in, what I call the corporatocracy, those who don't want change. So it's almost like we've got these two huge waves, this wave of consciousness change that's coming in, and this wave of the status quo trying to hold its own. So that's why we're seeing this huge reaction on the part of police forces and drones and Patriot Acts and all these different things. But that's changing too. The Supreme Court decision recently is it's mind-blowing almost. And so we're really seeing an incredible change of consciousness. And after all, that's what the Awakening the Dreamer is all about. And now realizing that it truly is time to take action, that we've woken up, and now it's time for the game changer. It's up to us. It's time to get out there and for all of us to take action. I'm reminded, seeing the Dalai Lama speaking here in Southern California, of having spent time with him a number of years ago when I took a group, and we had the honor of being in his living room with him. And at the end, he said, it's really important to pray for peace and meditate on peace. But if that's all you do, it's a waste of time. We also have to take action. And the Dalai Lama said, we must take appropriate action. He likes that word, appropriate action, every single day for peace. And I think the same can be said for all change. So we've awakened dreamers around the world. The world is awakening. Consciousness revolution has happened. And now it's time to get out there and take action. And that's what we're all about. And I'm so excited to be part of this.
One of the things that I think is really important to acknowledge is the emergence of consciousness around social justice. And unfortunately, the tragedy at the AME Church and some of these other horrific tragedies, but particularly that one, has highlighted and kind of put over the edge of this incredible piercing through intolerance or tolerance, to get to a place where we can't tolerate the injustice any longer, and the gap between the extraordinary extreme wealth and people being left, more and more people being left out. It's people can't stand it. And it's so clear that institutions are not going to handle it, that it's civil society, that it is the rising tide of human beings gathering together, organizing themselves in what many people call the informal sector or the NGO sector. And to reference Brazil again, being in Brazil where the government is stymied, where the economy is flat and in trouble, civil society is just raging in a good way, flourishing, you could say is a better word, but raging out of knowing that the government's just not going to do it. And I think we've given up on that, which is kind of a good thing. It's not that we don't want to transform our democracy. Yes, we do. But what's really happening is the up to usness, which is the name of obviously our pathway and our ecosystem, is really ringing true for people, and they know that they've got to get involved. And so I think there's something about that that I wanted to acknowledge and celebrate. And then this thing about the Pope. I mean, I was raised a Catholic, I got to say. When he apologized and asked for forgiveness when he was in Ecuador for the 500 years of horrors that the Catholic Church has perpetrated on Latin America, particularly on indigenous people, when the head of the Catholic Church now asked for forgiveness, a man who's named for St. Francis, who was many people would say the first environmentalist, St. Francis, 1,000 years ago, who actually transformed the Catholic Church way back then. When that man, who whether you're Catholic or not, has a voice that can be heard around the world with a kind of gravitas and power, made that kind of statement and has written a 190-page encyclical on our home, climate change, and that the true scripture is nature. This is an incredibly radical, kind of like out-of-the-box thing for that particular position of authority to be saying. And to me, it's a breakthrough of the first order. And to allow that breakthrough to fully manifest, I say it's time for all of us to up the ante and be as courageous as the Pope has been inside of an institution that was crumbling from within, decaying from within, that now is taking, not the institution, but the man who's leading it, a kind of leadership role that I've dreamed of all my life as someone who was raised in that faith. So I'm so inspired and so encouraged, and I think, well, Bill, maybe you're going to say this, but Bill said in a meeting we were in where we were updating some of our donors in person, he said the cavalry's coming over the hill. It's kind of like that. Oil prices, the Pope, you know, the Supreme Court decision actually being open to things that you wouldn't have imagined 5 years ago the Supreme Court would decide in the United States. So whether you're from the United States or Japan or China or Brazil or Ecuador or Philadelphia or, you know, Bogota, something is afoot, and it is more powerful than government. It is more powerful than anything. And I'm thrilled and honored to be part of the great movement and being a Pacha person, catalyzing everything we can to have it happen. And then I just want to say, Minister Ellers of Ecuador, who was here, who's the Minister of Buen Vivir, Sumac Causai, which is the enshrined in the Ecuadorian Constitution about having the good life, not always going for the better life, but for the good life. We met with some of the most prestigious universities in the Bay Area, and Ecuador and this commitment in the government to living the good life. And when you reach the good life, whatever excess you have overflows and gives other people a chance at the good life, is such a bold, bold kind of human development. So there's more to say on that, but I think people want to ask questions, and I know you want to make a few more comments about the world.
Well, I love your comment about the cavalry coming over the hill, because when
you said that.
I know, when I said that, though, that was before
the Pope's
encyclical. And what I was looking at was just, you know, oil prices are down. My assessment is oil prices are down because people recognize that at some point we are going to address climate change. And when we address climate change, it means we're going to get off fossil fuels. And when we get off fossil fuels, it means that there is already oil that's been discovered, that's in the reserves of the oil companies, that's going to get left in the ground. It's not going to be burned. And so suppliers of oil are not interested in holding back their supply now. People want to sell their oil. And the oversupply is keeping the prices down. The Pope's encyclical is not unrelated to that. The Pope's encyclical, that thinking that's been going on, that encyclical was a deep, deep analysis put together by a lot of research, footnoted, and that thinking that's been going on that generated that encyclical is really, I think, what we were noticing before. And now it's so, to see the Pope say that we've got to address climate change, the fact that oil prices are down is related to that. It's related to the Dalai Lama saying the same thing. So the cavalry is showing up, and it's making a huge difference. It's going to make a huge difference in our work, Pachamama Alliance's work in Ecuador. It's going to make a huge difference for just the sense of empowerment and excitement that the indigenous people have. And I think it's, as you say, which is saying, it's really a call for all of us to notice that there's something happening that is an opening for people who are committed to making a difference with their lives to step up and do it now. There's an opening, there's a place to step in, and that's really what I think that's what's happening. That's what John was talking about when these waves coming together. There's just a huge space of possibility for creation, possibility for people of goodwill and vision to engage and really take the reins and shape our future now. And that's what our programs are about, being an evolutionary activist as part of the Game Changer Intensive is what we're asking people to consider and to stand for. And so I'm just really excited about what's possible now and what we're going to be talking about 6 months from now when we give our next update. Things we're going to have to say.
Yay.
Yeah.
Let's see. I guess, we are at the point where we should see if there's people have questions and we can have a dialogue. Let's see.
Jack O'Malley
Somebody
is asking, how do you think Pope Francis's encyclical will affect the Pachamama Alliance?
What a great question.
I think I'll just say, I think
Yeah.
it totally affirms, validates, strengthens, empowers everything we stand for. And I recommend, there's a whole lot of summaries of it. There's a study guide you can get on Amazon. It's a very long document. As Bill said, it's footnoted. But I know one of the institutes that I'm involved with is studying it with a fine-tooth comb. And I feel that it is one of the most important developments maybe in my lifetime, but certainly in this first beginning of the 21st century. We're only 15 years into the 21st century. And when you look at the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations and the Pope's encyclical, first of all, the Millennium Development Goals, I think, as you all know, have been replaced by Sustainable Development Goals, which have a lot of teeth, which are about social justice, and they even refer to transformation. And the Pope's encyclical from a religious leader, from the United Nations, from a religious leader, have so much in common. And you could say, as John said and as Bill said, it's as if the whole thing comes out of the kind of space of the symposium. So it's affirming, it deepens our resolve, it affirms what Pachamama Alliance is doing, and it gives a kind of like a surge in our work, not only in Latin America, of course, huge for Latin America, but also for the world. And his reference to indigenous people and respecting their rights and their custodianship of the land on which they live is a huge part of what's important, I think, for Pachamama Alliance.
Great.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add that I was reading some of the Islamic press today, from the Middle East and so forth, and there's this very strong support of the Pope's message from that community too, very strong, and pointed out that in the next 30 years or so, Christianity and Islam are likely to be about the same numbers, about 30% of the world's population for each, so that's 60% of the world's population. And the Islamic press was pointing out that we really have to come together to recognize that we're all living on a fragile, tiny space station with no shuttles. All of us have to come together.
There's a question about let's see, how is Chevron oil company still impacting the environment? And I'm going to answer that from the standpoint of how is it impacting the environment in Ecuador.
That's from Suzanne.
Yes, maybe from Suzanne Halstead. And so it's still Chevron oil companies. The damage that was left there is still having a huge impact. It hasn't been cleaned up, and it isn't being cleaned up yet because Chevron is still trying to shirk its responsibility under Ecuadorian law and international law to pay for its cleanup. It's putting a huge amount of effort and money into avoiding that liability that was established by the courts in Ecuador. And from my standpoint, it's untenable. It's an unjustifiable position.
It's criminal.
Yeah,
It's truly criminal.
And I would, so people should do what they think is appropriate with regards to that.
don't buy from Chevron. And recently I was in Romania that's having very similar problems with Chevron in Romania, and it's also happening in Myanmar. Chevron's a bad company. All the oil companies are tough to justify, but this one is particularly terrible, just not putting in the money that it should.
So there's a question, let's see, do the Mother Earth provisions in Ecuador's constitution, the rights of nature provisions in Ecuador's constitution, have any real effect on the push for oil development?
It's from John Girardi.
Yeah.
It's you.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, they don't have a lot of impact for a couple of reasons. The arguments that are being made is that you can actually do oil development and have a minimal impact on the environment. That's an argument that the government uses, and so they say we're not violating the rights of nature because we're not disrupting, at least at the surface level, we're not disrupting the functioning of the environment. It's actually clearer what the government's position is when you see rights of nature applied to mining, because large open pit mining in Ecuador does clearly violate the rights of nature as described in the Constitution of Ecuador. And the government has declared that couple of the large mining projects, because they're in they're so much tied up with the national economic interest, that the government is not applying the rights of nature provisions of the Constitution. So we're seeing that the government avoids that provision when it's not in their interest. It is being used a lot in Ecuador on smaller cases, and it is making a difference, and it is gradually establishing a series of laws that people are learning how to apply it, and it's up at the top level. It's being avoided still by the government. Let's see.
There was another question about how will Pachamama Alliance reverse the cultural trend to destroy cultures here at home in order to empower our own indigenous people, from Ruth Ann Purchase. That's a really good question. We struggle with that, I would say, because we have our roots in the Amazon, we have our roots with cultures that are intact and unculturated, actually. And that indigenous wisdom is really a huge part of what informs and inspires the Pachamama Alliance. At the same time, we know that right here in the United States, where we live, cultures have been totally devastated. And to reverse that is not necessarily the mission of the Pachamama Alliance, but I think, I'll just say, the consciousness that gets generated out of our transformational educational programs and the privilege of being associated and in partnership with indigenous people who are intact gives us a deep and profound appreciation of our indigenous people here at home in the United States, if you're a US person. And the connection that we've made with some of the indigenous leaders here in this part of the world and the indigenous people in South America, so that they can strengthen each other's resolve and determination to be in solidarity, has been part of what you have funded, those of you who are donors. That has made a huge difference to both peoples, to see what the dangers could be ahead, which strengthens the resolves of the people who are still intact, and for those who have been destroyed, to see what they want to recover. So we have made a difference, and it's not our focus. But do you want to add anything?
Well, I would just say that anyone who takes a symposium, goes through the Game Changer Intensive, the understanding of who we are as a species and our responsibility, our connection to nature, our responsibility for it, puts you in a position where you have a new listening for indigenous cultures everywhere. Mm-hmm. You have a new sense of justice for people everywhere. And although we don't have any specific programs addressing the loss of culture of indigenous people in North America, people who have been involved in our work are intimately involved in that, and we wholeheartedly support it.
And I would just say also that we do have journeys now that go to an indigenous compound in New Mexico with Arcon Luchuano, a place called Arawaka. We have 2 or 3 journeys a year that actually engage with an intact indigenous culture in New Mexico and go through rituals and sweat lodges that really connect us here in North America with our indigenous heritage and our indigenous roots. That's extremely powerful. So we are beginning to engage with that.
And I think it may also be important to point out that we were invited by the indigenous people way back in the early 90s in South America to work with them. And at that time, there was tremendous trauma among the indigenous peoples of North America who didn't really, for the most part, want us meddling with them. You know, the invitation was not there. That's changing. And I think that's changing to a large degree because of the influence of some of the indigenous people from South America and the gatherings that have happened. And so the North American indigenous people are really opening their hearts now to participating with us. Whereas when we first got started, that really wasn't the case. That there was indigenous people. Perhaps it really has mentality. It sounds strange because certainly the Spaniards were very brutal, but those cultures stayed very much intact underground, whereas here they were so devastated, so terribly devastated, and they're coming back now too, which is extremely positive.
Yeah, and I think of the Indigenous Environmental Network that we work really closely with, that has has grown a lot over the last 20 years here,
Right.
and is working real closely with the indigenous people in Latin America.
They're really all coming together.
Yeah, so there's something is coming together. There was a question about how does Game Changer and how does it work? Where's that? How does the Game Changer Intensive connect to the work of the rainforest with the Achuar? And there, for me, the answer is one of the things. Well, because it's the Game Changer Intensive is about changing the dream of people in the modern world. And if we change the dream in the modern world, we will reduce the pressure for consumption of rainforest hardwoods, of oil, of minerals that are under the rainforest. Plus, one of the main focuses of the intensive is organizing people around this issue of getting a carbon tax passed. And if we could get a carbon tax and dividend program passed in the United States, that would be a game changer in terms of breaking our economy's addiction to fossil fuels. If we can break our economy's addiction to fossil fuels, that'll relieve the pressure for oil development into the Amazon, and it'll make our job of getting permanent protected status for that area that much easier. So it ties together that way.
How about the next, has the NGO status of Pachamama Lions been restored in relation to the Ecuadorian government? And that's from Jim. And that's really for you, but I'll say that we reorganized ourselves as a consulting firm. So we're no longer an NGO in Ecuador. We actually, your funding, if you're a donor, Jim, goes through the Pachamama Lions directly to the indigenous federations, and then the consulting firm, which has the same people who were part of the NGO, work directly with the indigenous federations to empower them to protect their lands and cultures. And so our work really, although it was not our ideal scenario to be shut down by the government and have our NGO status removed, in a way it has strengthened us. We had to really refocus, retool, redesign, rethink, recommit. And in a way, you might say that kind of almost like an organizational trauma really had us have to rethink our strategy in a way that I would say we're ever more effective. And we're now finding ways, as Bill said earlier, to re-establish our relationship with the government so that adversarial happening is starting to smooth out and not be the basis of what's going on, but rather something that's way in the past. And I just want to say that the visit of the Pope, this is not so related to your question, but a little bit. The leader of our work in Ecuador, Belén Páez, who many of you know, said the experience of having the Pope in Ecuador speaking to huge numbers of people in open air settings has had bickering and adversarial nature of politics and people being angry with this, that, and the other thing just sort of calmed down, and there was a sense of deep and profound unity as a result of his visit and the communication which he delivered, which was so deep and so honorable and so ennobling of all peoples in that country and in the world. So I think something amazing happened out of that. That what sometimes I call a kerfuffle with the government. That's probably not the right word. Something amazing happened where we had to rebirth ourselves, resource ourselves, and out of that, I say we're stronger, and our work is ever more effective.
Great. There's a question from Jocelyn. How did Ecuador sell oil blocks to Chinese petroleum companies without seeking free, prior, and informed consent from the indigenous people living in those areas? Free, prior, and informed consent is now required before developing indigenous lands, according to rulings by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. So that is true, and it's not just from the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, but through other international labor organization law and other laws. It's clear that indigenous people have to be informed. There has to be free. They have to be engaged in consultation. The actual consent is something that, whether they have the right to consent, is still not been determined. The Chinese oil companies, the government claimed that they did an adequate job of prior consultation with the indigenous people, and we say, and the indigenous people say they didn't, and the Pachamama Alliance has been gathering, our lawyers have been gathering information for the last year, gathering a case to be able to bring another case in the Inter-American court system, challenging anything that does happen and goes forward with that Chinese block, which is oil blocks 79 and 83, which we've talked about in several cases in the past with people here. So the government is not living up to what it should be doing, and we're gathering information that we intend to bring a legal case challenging that if ever anything does go forward in that block. So far, the Chinese oil companies, although they have the right to develop the blocks, they've really not done anything yet.
So there's another question here. How may we best organize now to meet the challenges that are unfolding in unified ways? From Marie. And I think that's a good one.
I think that's Mari. I bet it's Mary Hart. I don't know. But I say to mirror to everyone around you the power of what's happening, and making sure that they don't not see it, so that no one gets left out. To strengthen the cavalry coming over the hill, to strengthen people's ownership and authorship of the times we're living in and the power that they have to make a difference, to recognize, in my understanding of the world, that the structures and systems are crumbling. There's another question coming about Greece and what's happening with Greece and the European Union. I feel that the structures and systems that we are living inside of are calcified and rigid and now crumbling. And one of the things we say in the symposium is the job of people now is to hospice the natural death of the structures and systems that are no longer serving us, that are unsustainable and that are falling apart. And we don't need to kill them. They are dying. They are unsustainable, which means they're not lasting. And we can hospice their natural death with some measure of gratitude so that they leave the stage, those structures and systems, while we midwife the birth of the new structures and systems that are appropriate to a sustainable, just future. And that's all coming from civil society, from people, from communities, from NGOs, from people speaking their mind. So these big institutions are where a lot of calcification and what I'll call reification is caught. And if we're willing to realize that the voice of people is stronger than any of these institutions, and they will change at our will, and they will fall apart because they're no longer viable, while new ones will emerge that we create. That's what I would say to that wonderful question.
Great.
And this is the last question. So,
John, there's a question on Greece, and I know you have all the answers about Greece.
Yeah.
Because you were one of those guys that got them in trouble years and years.
Exactly. Yeah.
Economic
Exactly.
hitman.
And I've been fielding a lot of questions on radio and TV shows the last couple of weeks. So, yeah, just to summarize, the question is, about the European Union's violence, mental and political violence against the Greek people. And Tony says, I hope that we can learn from your experience with governments. My personal feeling is that the change must grow organically from people working together on the ground and gradually building networks that will be able to withdraw their support and reclaim the authority that they have ceded to oppressive authority. I totally agree, Tony. I think one of the very impressive things about what happened in Greece is that it was a true democratic process. The government didn't try to enforce anything to begin with. They went out for a referendum, and the Greek people voted overwhelmingly, more than 60%, to stand up to the European Union. And I think that's a very strong message. Unfortunately, it appears now that the government may be crumbling, but it also appears that maybe the people aren't going to accept that. Whatever the final outcome, the important thing is for us all to understand that we, the people, have to do it. The governments can't do it. And I think if the Greek government is crumbling, this government that's been so strong, that's really reflected the people, if it does start to crumble, it sends a very strong message that it always has to come from we the people, and that certainly is the true meaning of democracy, and it's what we at Pachamama Alliance is all about. It's up to us. It's not, it doesn't matter who the president is, from what culture, from what nationality, from what gender the president of the United States or any other country is from. Ultimately, the leaders cannot and will not change things radically the way they need to be. We, the people, have to do it, and we're doing it. It is indeed up to us, and it's up to the Pachamama Alliance, it's up to all of you out there, and I think the Greek people are really getting this. I think people around the world are getting it.
This is not directly on Greece, but I think it's related, or it's involved. So we just had a board of directors meeting yesterday. That's why it's one of the reasons John is here and we're all here. And in the board of directors meeting, we were talking about the work of the Pachamama Alliance and some of the challenges and the issues of social inequity and social injustice in the world, and how we really need to focus on that. And when I was reading the Pope's encyclical, it's a powerful theme throughout. It's about the environment, and it's about poverty, and it's about addressing poverty. But the story he tells is a story of why there's poverty, and he doesn't come quite straight out and say it, but it's in there. And what I got was the issue we've got to deal with is poverty is not the issue. The issue we have to deal with is wealth. There's the problem. Poverty is not the problem. Mm-hmm. The problem is wealth, and we need to figure out how to deal with wealth. If we deal with wealth, we can start to get at some of the issues that Greece is caught in. And so many of our other problems in the world are the result of us not having grounded and connected ourselves properly with this phenomenon of wealth. And wealth is
it comes down to what the Pope and the Dalai Lama is saying. It's about love, ultimately.
Yeah, right.
And how much do we love the earth? To really love the trees out there the way the indigenous people do.
To love each
other. To love ourselves. And by each other we mean everybody, embracing everybody and every sentient being.
It's only as the Dalai Lama said at this climate change panel, I understand, that he said that the scientists on that panel said, we've done all we can. We've identified all the problems. All the technologies to handle it have been invented. What it now is, it's in the hands of compassionate human beings who are conscious and who are ready to make the changes. And that's really the Pachamama Alliance. That's our work. Yeah.
Great. Well,
So
what else?
then-
We're 3 minutes ahead.
Well, I want to do a commercial for the November 19th Pachamama Alliance luncheon event in San Francisco. For those of you who can be in San Francisco, please come and fill a table of wonderful people to hear the Pachamama Alliance either for the first time or to be renewed in their commitment. And we'll do another luncheon in New York City on Thursday, December 3rd, for those of you on the East Coast, so West Coast and East Coast. So I just want you to get that in your calendars. And to sign up for the Game Changer Intensive, which last sign-up day is September 6th. If you haven't taken it, even if you have taken it, I took it 3 times. I loved it so much, and I want to take it again. There's so much in there that it really is worth taking over and over and over again, or become a moderator and be one of the people who helps people guide through it. Also, the symposium will be put in this format, which will be a course online in August, and you can review the symposium. You can review the content of the symposium. It's called a seminar, not the symposium itself. And if you haven't taken it live and in person, please do that. And of course, our journeys are open to everybody, and go to our website and sign up for everything, everywhere, all the time. And we love you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for your support, for being partners with us, and for spending this time with us today.
Yeah, we look forward to seeing you at one of our events soon. Thank you.
And for those of you who are financial supporters, it's always important for me to say thank you, congratulations, and if you aren't a financial supporter, it's never too late to do that right now. You can push that donate button and join us in that way as well. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.